Echoes of Aincrad spent years trying to find the right identity before finally moving from concept to reality. The project began in 2019, and it is evident that the team did not intend to make just another Sword Art Online game, but rather a title that would change how the franchise is presented. What stands out most is the decision to place the player at the center of the experience with a custom-created protagonist, rather than repeating Kirito once again. To me, this shows a bolder development intent, as the team clearly understood that to create something truly new, they needed to alter the foundation of the formula rather than just the finishing touches. I also find it interesting that the developers seem to have chosen a more controlled scope, focusing only on the first 2 floors of Aincrad. In practice, this feels like a mature decision. Instead of overextending with the gigantic map and risking a bloated or unpolished game, they preferred to concentrate resources to build a more solid and coherent structure. The inclusion of a mode like Death Game, where losing means losing progress, further reinforces the idea that the development team sought to capture the dramatic weight of the original Sword Art Online concept. I see this as a sign that the team was not just thinking about content, but about transforming the atmosphere of the work into playable mechanics, which is always a significant design challenge. Another point that makes a good impression is the mix between original story and progressive elements. This seems to be a smart production solution, as it allows the essence of Aincrad to be maintained without being trapped by a literal adaptation, which often restricts development and limits the creative team's freedom. The demo also helps reinforce the image of a project that has reached a much more confident stage of development. It includes 5 full missions, access to all weapons, and even save transfers to the final version, which typically only happens when a team wants to test public reception with a relatively representative slice of the game. My impression is that Echoes of Aincrad appears to have been developed with ambition, yet without losing control of its scope. For me, what is most notable is not just the fact that it is a new Sword Art Online title, but the fact that the development seems to have sought its own identity, with safer choices behind the structure and bolder choices in its proposal. The story seems to want to place the player at the center of this anguish, with an original protagonist and without Kirito as the axis of the plot, while still carrying the weight of the classic death game concept. The narrative does not try to hide its origin in Sword Art Online, it embraces it openly and uses the setting of Aincrad itself as a dramatic force. This helps significantly because Aincrad is not just a pretty stage, it is a vertical prison, and this structure naturally creates tension, a sense of progression, and fear for each new area. In practice, this gives it the feel of a survival journey that fits well with an action RPG. Based on what has been released, the plot seems to begin with the shock of the beta closure and the transition to the real nightmare of the launch, which is an effective choice for establishing urgency. I like this because it does not waste time explaining the obvious. It throws the player into the collective trauma from the beginning and lets the story emerge from the characters' reactions, not just from a villain or a central mission. It is the type of premise that works best when the game aims to be, above all, a survival story. The demo also reinforces a more intimate narrative line, almost like the first days of confinement, where alliances, information, and trust seem to matter as much as fighting. For me, this is where the story gains the most strength. It is not just about defeating bosses, but about understanding who you become when no one knows what will happen on the next floor. If the game maintains this human focus, it could end up being more interesting than many spin-offs that rely solely on nostalgia. At the same time, I have a reservation. The premise is strong, but it is also very well known. So the success of the story will depend on how it develops the original protagonist and the conflicts around them. If the plot just repeats the prison survival floor-by-floor structure, it risks sounding too safe. I hope it uses familiarity as a starting point, not a crutch. Another point that encourages me is that the developer seems to be treating the drama with seriousness without selling the story as a light adventure disguised as danger. The release material insists on the idea of real risk, permanent loss, and constant tension, and this matches the darker identity of Aincrad. To me, this is the minimum required for the narrative to work. If the threat does not feel concrete, the story loses its emotional impact. The story has a better chance of working through its atmosphere than its originality. It does not seem to want to reinvent the Aincrad arc, and honestly, I think that is the right choice, provided the game can give weight to the new characters, and make the player feel they are living their own version of this horror. If it delivers this, the story could be one of the strongest parts of the game. If not, it will remain a pleasant visual reminder of Sword Art Online, but without sufficient narrative identity. The combat loop is undoubtedly the strongest point of the game so far. From the first minutes of the demo, one can feel that Bandai Namco wanted to build something more focused and responsive than previous titles in the Sword Art Online franchise. Attacking, dodging, parrying, everything flows with a cohesion that is not common in anime adaptations. It is not perfect, but it is honest. You know exactly what you are doing and why you are doing it. The 6 weapon categories have well-defined roles, and that makes all the difference. The sword and shield offer that classic balance that any beginner can grasp. The great sword moves slowly but hits hard with satisfying impact. Daggers keep you in constant motion, almost like a dancer on the battlefield. Each type has a clear identity, and you can feel it in the first few minutes of use, without needing to read a 30-page manual to understand what you're equipping. The stamina management adds a tactical layer that I personally did not expect to enjoy so much. Attacking, dodging, and blocking with the shield consume energy, and when it runs out, you are truly vulnerable. This forces you to think before pressing buttons frantically as if it were any other hack and slash. The sword skills are the cherry on top. Powerful attacks that drain SP quickly, so using them at the right moment provides that feeling of, it was worth saving this. The partner system is where the game surprised me most positively. The switch mechanic, where you alternate aggro between yourself and your AI partner, seems simple on paper, but in practice it creates a very interesting combat dance. You can go in aggressively, get interrupted by an enemy, trigger the switch, and use that interval to reposition while your partner draws attention. It is cooperative without requiring a second player, which works very well. The post-parry counterattack connected to the partner is one of the most creative details of the demo. After executing a well-timed parry, you can press a button to unleash a counterattack through your partner, a direct extension of your weapon in the form of an ally. Switching the partner's mode from support to offensive in the middle of battle by pressing a single button is simple to execute and surprisingly effective. What worries me, to be honest, is the question of long-term variety. The demo has 5 missions and shows the pace of combat and progression well, but it is not enough to say if the game will sustain that same level of engagement for 30 or 40 hours. The synergies between weapons and partners were not even available to test in the demo, which suggests there is content held back, but also raises the question, is what was shown the peak or just the beginning? In general, the gameplay of Echoes of Aincrad seems the most solid of the franchise in a long time. It is not revolutionary. Parries, stamina, and tactical partners are not new ideas, but the execution is clearly more polished and intentional than the history of Sword Art Online games suggested. If Bandai Namco can maintain this consistency in the full game that launches on July 10th, 2026, action RPG fans have plenty of reasons to be encouraged. Play the demo before buying, but the chances are good that you will like what you find. The first impression is quite clear. The game wants to convey that premium, big-budget anime aesthetic with environments that effectively sell the Aincrad fantasy from the very first second. The game seems to bet more on visual impact and atmosphere than heavy realism, and this fits the proposal of an anime-based action JRPG. The release material attempts to make the world look like a living place, almost as if every area were designed to seem important and memorable. It has that atmosphere of a floating castle, open landscapes, and dungeons that, on paper, already convey a sense of scale and adventure. This counts for a lot because, in a game like this, the visuals need to make the player believe in this world before the gameplay even engages. In the demo, the impression is that the graphics are more concerned with being beautiful and functional than with revolutionizing the industry. I would say there is a balance typical of modern anime games. Characters with good visual readability, clean colors, and effects that help sell the action without suffocating everything with excessive detail. For me, this works better than trying to force a level of realism that might not fit the game's identity. At the same time, one can feel that the game still carries some safer, almost conservative visual choices, as if it prefers not to risk too much in the artistic finishing. This is not necessarily bad, but it makes some scenes feel pretty but familiar. In an anime JRPG, this might be enough to please, but it could also leave a more demanding player wanting a bit more visual personality. The art direction hits the mark in composition, and the game gains a lot because the environment becomes part of the fantasy, not just a background. And this type of feeling is exactly what I look for in such a game. It is not enough to be clean. It needs to look like a world I want to explore just for the pleasure of looking. For the characters, the visuals seem to follow a very safe path, well aligned with the brand the game wants to sell. The armor, weapons, and silhouettes have that finish that speaks to anime fans without alienating those who just want a visually pleasant action RPG. I like this because, at least in the demo and the material shown, everything seems designed to be immediately recognizable on screen. My opinion is that the graphics of Echoes of Aincrad are beautiful, competent, and made to greatly please those who enjoy this anime JRPG aesthetic with an epic scale. It is not the type of visual I would describe as bold or transformative, but it is enough to sustain the game's identity well and sell the fantasy it aims for. For me, its greatest visual strength is exactly this. It knows what it wants to be and seems quite comfortable within that proposal. The graphics of Echoes of Aincrad seem quite ambitious, and my impression is that the performance is above what many would expect from an anime game that feels like a big JRPG. From the demo and what has been disclosed, it tries to deliver a beautiful visual without appearing too sluggish on PC, which is already a good sign for a recently presented game. The game's own page notes a performance mode aimed at 1080p and 60 frames per second, in addition to a balanced and equality mode, which suggests that the developer thought about scaling performance well from the start. This gives me the feeling that this is not a project that depends solely on running at the limit. There is a clear intent to offer options for different machines. In practice, the demo shows that performance varies significantly depending on the area. In initial sections, I saw high frame rates and smooth gameplay, but in regions with more NPCs or more open areas, there were noticeable drops, stutter, and frame rate fluctuations. The positive side is that even with these fluctuations, the game runs well overall, and the drops are usually brief, without ruining the experience. For me, this indicates a solid technical foundation, but one not yet fully polished to maintain constant stability in everything the demo shows. I also found the contrast between the visuals and the weight of the game important. It seems to use an anime and cel-shaded style mixed with more realistic environments, and this gives the impression of a visually expensive game without necessarily being as heavy as it might seem. When it works, the result is convincing. When it does not work, the problem is less about it looking ugly and more about losing consistency in the rhythm of the gameplay. My assessment is that the game delivers a strong graphical base and performance that already seems playable and even good on many PCs, but it does not yet convey that confidence of being stable in any situation. If the final version fixes the area-specific drops and stutters, it could become a very solid example of a beautiful JRPG without being a technical disaster. I would say that Echoes of Aincrad seems to have a real chance of being worth the purchase at launch, but it is not an obvious choice for everyone. The demo and what has been shown so far indicate a game with good visual identity, interesting combat, and strong appeal for those who enjoy Sword Art Online and action JRPGs, but still with signs that the final polish may vary. The game is recommended for fans of the franchise, players who enjoy real-time combat with a focus on parry, stamina, and character progression, and those who like more guided experiences with a strong anime atmosphere. The game also seems to be a good option for those who value setting and proposal over extreme depth. Perhaps the game is not the best choice for players who demand high stability at launch, a very free open world, a huge variety of content, or a level of polish that is already perfect on day one. First impressions suggest that the game has clear strengths, but also areas that can still evolve. It is worth the purchase at launch if you are aligned with the target audience. If you want more security, waiting a few days or weeks after the premiere to see real performance and final feedback remains the most prudent option. It does not seem like a risky purchase for those who already enjoy the proposal, but it also does not seem mandatory for those who are in doubt. The deciding factor here is how much you are interested in the universe and the game style, because that is what carries the most weight in its favor today.